first up, we're going to have Emily Lieber, who, do I do the bio and then, or just
go
the bio?
for it,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So Emily Lieber, or Lieber, right? Oh my God, I'm so nervous. Is an independent journalist focusing on exoplanets, particle physics, and the history and future of countercultural social movements. Her reporting has been featured in Dissent and the Alpha Centauri Evening Post. And should we say the title of her presentation?
Yeah, the title.
It is The Cultural and Literary Interplanetary Tendencies, Subversive Movements of the 31st Century. So,
Thanks. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. Hi, sorry if I'm a little discombobulated. I've just come back from very far away, not in space, but in time. So as you might have noticed, I have 2 watches. It's not just an aesthetic thing, but it's one for each time zone. And not time zones as, you might understand them, but the thing is that sometimes time doesn't work in a linear fashion, and, in certain perfect conditions, when the stars align in a metaphorical sense, time can even go in loops, and that's really why I'm here today. I'm here to tell you about a feminist movement on the exoplanet TRAPPIST 1G. So for those of you who don't know, there are 4 TRAPPIST planets. They're orbiting around a red dwarf star, and they're habitable to humanity. And these planets were colonized by the governments of Earth in the 29th century, after humans kind of, fucked up the Earth. I'm sorry, but it doesn't work out. All of the kind of efforts that people have made to make humans not have a terrible effect on their environment. On the balance, it almost worked, but it didn't quite. It took kind of a lot of different cataclysms to get humans to make this move, because you know how humans are. And this was a long time in the making. Longer than even 900 years. But there have always been humans who believe humanity might be able to certainly leave the Earth and transcend all of these earthly problems. And and of course there's some people who believe in the rapture and Jews have to all go back to Israel so that there's a Messiah. But there are other more regular people who believe that. Can you grab the next slide, please? Yeah, so, ever since space travel was really an object of consideration, even just a glimmer in a poet's eye, so Cyrano de Bergerac wrote about, a guy who went to the moon in 1657, and that was a space utopia. And then there's another space utopia, in today's time that Elon Musk has kind of conceptualized for himself. So I'm just going to read this. Elon Musk wants to colonize Mars, but Earth needs to write its constitution first. And so this article was actually very prescient, as I'm about to explain in a moment. But what I want to say is there's a sense that outer space can be a utopia, a blank slate on which humanity can kind of build a completely new society that doesn't have, any of the negative externalities. And you can just leave yourself behind. Kind of how people have thought about America, right? That you can reinvent yourself. People thought that about space as well. But unfortunately, humanity was very soon back on its bullshit. And so, the next slide. All right, so the TRAPPIST-1 system, which were, these planets were all given normal names, that are easily pronounceable. Okay, so basically there was a totalitarian capitalist empire ruled by the Musk dynasty. So that's, that was unfortunate. And, after a while, the underclasses got kind of tired of being, basically subjugated by the forces of capital, and decided to go to a planet that had kind of not been explored so much, Galatea. So the Galatean Free State was formed, and it was a little bit of a secret because, obviously the state is all powerful and can surveil everybody at all times. So what was going to happen happened, that it was discovered, and the sort of, the entity that was more powerful than governments that kind of governed everything, the Interplanetary Monetary Fund, or IMF, it decided to step in because it could not allow, a more free state to coexist with a totalitarian one. And so as it saw it, it established a sort of compromise between a dictatorship and democracy. And so they held, they devised a new constitution. They held a number of referendums on the constitution. It took about 5 or 6 referendums to actually get the masses to agree to this, but eventually they were convinced and they saw it was best for them, and this kicked off the era of technological determinism. Can we have the next slide? Okay, so I think this kind of really prefigures what technological determinism is. It's the dominion of science over humanity. The simple fact that physicists split the atom without any hesitation at the very moment they knew how to do it, although they realized full well the enormous destructive potentialities of their operation, demonstrates that the scientist, qua-scientist, does not even care about the survival of the human race on Earth, or for that matter, about the survival of the planet itself. Valid and plausible arguments against the conquest of space could be raised only if they were to show that the whole enterprise might be self-defeating on its own terms. And this is something that Hannah Arendt actually wrote when the first satellite ascended into space, Sputnik. And so the thing about technological determinism is it basically consists of one state, or rather a conglomerate of public-private partnerships that rule the lives of every single human being in minute detail. And the keystone of this state project is data collection and optimization, and time travel. And so the state uses time travel. It has a monopoly of legitimate time travel. It also has a monopoly of legitimate violence, but time travel as well. And, the state uses time travel to regularly go forward in time every 10 or 15 years, see what's going on, see the state of the economy, and then they engineer the exact population necessary to fulfill the needs of the corporations that control the economy. And also another kind of useful thing for them about this is they can identify threats to the political order, and they can go back in time and prevent them from existing in the first place. So that's why the state has been able to survive for so long, because they really had a system worked out. And so basically the technology exists to sort of sort everyone into the job that society needs them to do. So at the age of 14, based on previously gathered data and your genetics and the tests that you have undergone, you're assigned a career path and you must stick to it. So for example, if you're going to be an astronaut, you're allotted certain kinds of food that kind of supposedly develop your aptitude to be an astronaut. Your muscle fibers are stimulated every night, overnight, by machines so that they might grow appropriately, because astronauts need to be physically fit. And surgeries are administered to make future astronauts taller or shorter so that they have the optimal body dimensions for the current model of spaceship. And in addition to careers, marriages are also determined by the overarching authority, because we're in the future, but apparently, we have solved the nuclear family. And they're called optimized marriages. They're arranged based on criteria including temperament, genetics, a whole lot of other criteria. And looking at the society in hindsight, or in foresight, or however you want to look at it, it kind of resembles something Michel Foucault called a heterotopia. I assume many of you have read about a lot of utopias. And so this is what he has to say about the difference between these two things. First, there are utopias. Utopias are sites with no real place. They are sites that have a general relation of direct or inverted analogy with the real space of society. They present society itself in a perfected form, or else society turned upside down. But in any case, these utopias are fundamentally unreal spaces. And there are also, probably in every culture and every civilization, real places that do exist and that are formed in the very founding of society, which are something like counter sites, a kind of effectively enacted utopia in which the real sites all the other real sites that can be found within the culture are simultaneously represented, contested, and inverted. Places of this kind are outside of all places, even though it may be possible to indicate their location in reality. So heterotopia's role is to create a space that is other. Another real space as perfect, as meticulous, as well arranged as ours is messy, ill-constructed, and jumbled. I wonder if certain colonies have not functioned somewhat in this manner. So he's writing in 1967. In certain cases, they have played on the level of the general organization of terrestrial space, the role of heterotopias. I'm thinking of those extraordinary Jesuit colonies that were founded in South America. Absolutely regulated colonies in which human perfection was effectively achieved. The daily life of individuals was regulated not by the whistle, but by the bell. Everyone was awakened at the same time. Everyone began work at the same time. Meals were at noon and 5 o'clock. Then came bedtime, and at midnight came what was called the marital wake-up. That is, at the chime of the church bell, each person carried out her/his duty. This is a real text. And so as you can imagine, not everyone wants to be commanded by a church bell to carry out their duty, no matter how innovative or disruptive. And one of the people who was not having any of this was Suzanne Tayeb. Can we have the next slide? So her identity has been censored to protect her because we don't know who's watching. And so she was placed in optimized marriage at the age of 19, so she ran away from home. Do you know how hard it is to run away from home in a society where your entire body is identifiable to the surveillance system? So you need to undergo a retina scan in public transit, in private transit, in schools and shopping centers, at the swimming pool. I mean, you need to be identifiable everywhere. And so theoretically, no one is safe. Anyone who has deviated from the norm, they're going to be caught up with immediately, and that round peg is going to be made to fit into a square hole. But Suzanne Tayeb was trained in hegemonic programming. Hegemonic programming was a very prestigious job at the time, and it was, it consisted of programming these systems of surveillance. So she was ideally poised to rewrite her identity, change the information they had on file so that she could not be found, and she could just live her life and mind her business, as we all want to do. And so she then linked up with a group of like-minded people who had managed to fly under the radar and who were kind of fighting for, greater autonomy. And that movement is the Post-terrestrial Unclassified Situationist Socialist Youth. So they're a feminist movement that is fighting the dominion over citizens' bodies and their futures. And they did this mostly at first through a series of symbolic subversions. So, what certain people have called culture jamming in the 60s. That's the kind of thing they did. So they were partially inspired by the Situationist International, which was concerned with counteracting the society of the spectacle and fighting back against the social dysfunction and degradation of everyday life. Through the construction of situations, moments in which you really have to interrogate what's happening and kind of reawaken yourself to your personhood. One of the things this organization did, with the help of portable holograms, they made their bodies pixelated or invisible in order to invade surveillance. And honestly, who would not want to be invisible sometimes and not have to be kind of relieved of the burden of existing in a corporeal body? It seems pretty cool, and I can't wait until we have that technology, personally. And another thing they did was they developed pills that speed time up. It's almost like you're living life at a lower frame rate, so that you can speed through everything that you don't really want to do. You can live it actually faster, much in the same way that time seems to pass slower when you're doing something you don't want to do. Time was able to actually physically pass faster for them, but this quickly became illegal for obvious reasons. And so you might ask, how do I know this? How do I know it? Where did I get this information? But so I was able to contact the Post-terrestrial, Unclassifiable, Situationist, Socialist Youth after years of diligent reporting, which eventually led me to the place where they are living. Not where they lived, not where they will live, but where they're living, because they're always actually living, and this might seem a little bit hard to believe, but let me just explain. So basically, the state was always going to catch up to them, right? Even if you kind of reformat the information, you know, eventually you're going to slip up. How do you communicate with people? Even if you use like analog means, even if you like send messengers with handwritten notes, they're going to follow the messengers. They're always going to find you. There's no way to move through space and not be tracked. So to escape harassment and repression by the authorities, they found new ways of moving through time. And they set up a time loop that functions as a self-sufficient society. It's a hidden time loop. And this is actually a recurring theme in feminist writing, because it's always in relation to a utopia that serves to reconstruct reality. It's a reinvention of time, thinking of it not as linear, but as circular. And so it's more locally a way of questioning one of the founding principles of dominant society, because linear time is linked to hierarchy and to duality, the duality between the future and the past, right? And of course, other dualities that we're familiar with, like the gender binary. So by abolishing these rigid arbitrary categories, writers such as Monique Wittig from the 20th century, or Christine de Pizan in the 15th century, these are real people. So they were, yeah, I mean, it might be that they had stumbled into a time loop, or maybe, you know, maybe it was just a convergence of great minds, but they were able to tear apart the dominant order of clocks and fixed calendars in favor of cycles. And so there's kind of a transtemporal communication between these feminist writers. Because even in the face of like official erasure or oblivion, you can find a way to live outside the hegemony, and you can transcend its control over time and over space. And so what they created with this group of beleaguered feminists created was, can we have the next slide? The communal loop in between two women. And so they've lived there ever since, though technically they always have and always will. And so these have historically been very useful loops. Many feminists over the years have used these kinds of loops because for some reason people can't really find them. Asada Shakur lives in one. That's why I can't find her. But you might live in one too one day. Because you never know who you might need to hide from or when you might need to hide. And so thank you for your kind attention. And I guess we've reached the Q&A portion of this talk. If anyone has any questions, if you don't, that's fine too. But anything I can offer? Yes.
Do you have any advice on how to seek out an entry point to the?
So I think if you just sit under a full moon and wait, so that vision will come to you. It's not really clear. How I found them was, just journalistic work, like just shoe leather reporting in journalism school. And basically I chased down Monique Wittig, who is still alive technically, and I sort of got some information out of her, pursued these leads. And eventually, one day, I kind of had fallen through a vortex, and after that, I managed to navigate it more effectively. But it takes a long time to find these spaces. They're hidden for a reason. Cool. Thank you so much.